Welcome everyone to Daf Yomi Moed Katan, 1 week at a time. This is our third lesson, and today we're going to be reviewing Daf 14 through 20. It is true that today is not Daf 20, but I decided to actually go through Tuesday as we normally would, because next week we are actually going to be we're going to be finishing the Masechet. So I'll repeat it at the end, but next week we're going back to our regular day on Tuesday. And we're going to review not only the week's daf, but we're going to also finish Wednesday and Thursday's daf as well. So I'll repeat that again at the end. So today, again, we're going to do daf 14 through 20, which is this week's daf, including through Tuesday. So those of you who are learning 1 day at a time, as opposed to 1 week at a time, so you're going to be ahead today. Those of you who are doing 1 week at a time, it's all good. So we're actually going to start at the Mishnah on the bottom of Daf 13. The Mishnah says that the following can get a haircut and shave on Chol HaMoed. As we mentioned previously, we said that you should not get a haircut on Chol HaMoed, on the intermediate days of the festival, because you should have done it beforehand. The Mishnah at the bottom of Daf 13 is going to tell us that there are certain people, due to extenuating circumstances, they could not prepare for the holiday before it started, and therefore they get special dispensations, and they're allowed to get a haircut or shave on the intermediate days, again, on Chol HaMoed. So who are these people? Someone who came back from an overseas trip, right? Again, in those days, you don't necessarily have proper timing, right? You get on a ship, and whenever it arrives in Israel, it arrives in Israel. So if you arrived on an overseas trip, again, and you didn't have chance, you can shave on Chol HaMoed. Or if you were released from captivity or from prison, or somebody who is released from excommunication, we are going to go into great lengths what this means. But to be excommunicated means that a sage says that you have done something wrong and therefore you are excommunicated from the community. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. Or if, let's say, you took a vow to not shave, and that vow ended exactly at the festival, or you were a Nazir, again, a Nazirite, someone who takes upon himself, he or she takes upon themselves to not cut their hair, and let's say it ends right at the festival, or if you were a mitzorah. Again, as we mentioned last time, mitzorah is someone who has leprosy. Again, not medical leprosy, but more of a spiritual leprosy. The top of 14 tells us you can wash your clothing on Chol HaMoed. Again, if you're one of the following people, again, a very similar list, right? If you traveled, if you were in captivity, excommunication, you had a vow, if you have hand towels, right? Those of you who use hand towels know they get dirty quickly. Oh, I actually do have a few pictures to share with you. Hold on 1 minute. They have a picture of, here, or this barber's, right? The what do you call it? The barber's, I forgot what it's called, but that cloth that you drape it with. So that can be washed. Again, that's going to get dirty, so you can wash that. Or if you were impure before the festival, and again, interestingly, we don't have this concept nowadays, but in the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara, when a person was impure, their clothing was also impure. So you needed to wash that clothing, put it in the mikvah in order for that to become purified. So anybody who became tahor, who became pure, smock. Thank you, Zohar. So a barber smock. Thank you. But anyone who became pure in this time period also can wash their clothing. Okay, the Gemara tells us on Daf 14 that most people cannot shave or get a haircut or do laundry on Chol HaMoed. You need to do it, as I mentioned before, you need to do it before the festival. And this is learned from the Mishmar. If you remember, we discussed the Mishmar was the week that your priests were going to the temple, and you, as part of the Jewish people, you kept a week where you were going to fast and pray. So it says that for that week, you needed to get a haircut beforehand, meaning you don't wait and do it in that week. You do it beforehand. Let's say you didn't have any time on Erev Chag, meaning on the day that at that night the festival is going to happen. Let's say, right? You said, oh, let's say Sukkot starts on Wednesday night. You said, I'm going to get a haircut Wednesday morning, and then you shopped and you cooked and you ran and you did this and you did that, and now all of a sudden you ran out of time. Can you get a haircut on Chol HaMoed? So the Gemara says no, because people don't know why, and they see you going to get a haircut. But the Gemara tells us that if you only have one garment, so then you can wash it on Chol HaMoed, and that's different because people will know that you're washing it. Again, in those days, it was very public when you were doing laundry. It's not like you threw your laundry into your washing machine in your house, right? So people are going to see it, and then people know why you're washing the things that you're washing. There's actually a machloket if you basically arrived after travel, right? Can you get a haircut? The question is, why did you travel, right? If you go for a cruise, right, and you say, oh, my ship is going to arrive right before the festival, so then I'll get a haircut when I get there. So the Gemara says no. If you went on a trip for pleasure, so then you should have made sure to be back in time to get a haircut. So then you cannot cut your hair. But if let's say you needed money, right? That's a reason you're allowed to travel. So then it's okay. And let's say you didn't need money, but you wanted more money. So now it's a machloket, right? Because you went for the right reason, but maybe you didn't need to go. And again, some say you should have cut it beforehand, and others say you can cut it on Chol HaMoed. Interestingly, the Gemara tells us that if a baby is born on Chol HaMoed, you can cut the baby's hair because it's as if he was let out of jail, which I thought was a nice line, right? He was born into the world, the baby was born into the world, and therefore you can cut the baby's hair. All of these people that we mentioned before can also cut their hair during mourning. And remember, if you remember last week, we drew a parallel, and the Gemara is going to continue to draw that parallel between things you are or not allowed to do on Chol HaMoed is parallel to the things you can or cannot do when a person is in mourning. So the Gemara says that if one of these people is in mourning, so again, if they were just let out of jail or if they just got back from a trip, so they can cut their hair, again, these are extenuating circumstances. The Gemara tells us that minors do not have to do the rituals of mourning, or maybe they do have to do some, but not all. Okay, the Gemara says that, again, interesting, there are no mourning rituals, again, mourning with a U, right? If someone is mourning, they do not practice those rituals on Chol HaMoed. If he was a mourner before Chol HaMoed, so then the mourning actually is going to end. We're going to talk more about this actually probably next week about again, the mourning period, right? The first period is 7 days. This is called Shiva, right? Or Shiva. Shiva means 7 days. That's followed by what's called Shloshim, which is 30 days. And the Gemara later on in the Masechet will tell us when there's a break in those days, when they get canceled. But the bottom line is that during the festival, you are not in mourning. And we'll see what that means later on. Again, if you became a mourner on Chol HaMoed, it becomes suspended till after the festival, and then after the festival, you will sit a full 7 days. You sit Shiva for 7 days. Um, Okay. The Gemara now talks about a person who is excommunicated. The word is minudeh, right? He is in nidui. Nidui means excommunication. Um, so the Gemara explains why you would be put into this nidui, either because you didn't listen to the verdict of the court, or if the court, right, again, if the court gives a verdict of capital punishment, again, the Gemara says here it talks about, can you do this on the festival? Maybe you can, maybe you cannot. And the Gemara says that if a person was excommunicated and then they repented, you can lift that excommunication, right? It's based on the person's behavior. The question is also, does Chol HaMoed suspend the obligations of a mitzorah? Again, mitzorah means the person who has leprosy. And now the Gemara is going to compare these people, meaning somebody who is in mourning, somebody who was excommunicated, and somebody who has leprosy. So those three people are all people who have certain rituals that they need to keep. And the question is, on Chol HaMoed, how do they practice? And the Gemara is going to see, is it parallel or not? So the Gemara tells us that again, that a a person with leprosy does keep the rituals that he needs to keep on Chol HaMoed, or maybe not. We'll see as we continue. So the bottom of Daf 14 tells us that a mourner cannot cut his hair. Again, we haven't mentioned this previously, but the Gemara says we learn it from Aaron, again, Moshe's brother, whose sons were killed, died and were killed. And God tells them, or Moshe tells them, that they're not allowed to cut their hair. So from there, we learned that a mourner is not allowed to cut his hair. Daf 15 tells us that someone with leprosy or someone in excommunication also can't cut their hair. So again, these three are going to be seen as parallel. The Gemara tells us that a person who has been excommunicated, they actually put a large stone on their grave as a sign that they were excommunicated. Okay, hold on one second. 1 minute. Okay. Here's a picture. The Gemara on Daf 15, it tells us, this is something that we don't really do nowadays, but the Gemara tells us that a mourner needs to wrap their head in a sign of mourning. So you can see we're going to talk about this tear. We still do that nowadays. We don't really have this idea of wrapping one's head, but in the time of the Gemara, that's what they did. And the Gemara says that we learned this from Yechezkel. Yechezkel was in mourning over his wife, but God told him, you actually are not allowed to mourn. So all these things you're going to, all the things that he's told to do are actually things a mourner is not allowed to do. So again, one is wrapping your head. Again, someone who is excommunicated also wraps their head, and so does the leper. So again, we see that they are parallel. The Gemara tells us that a mourner cannot wear tefillin. Again, learned from Yechezkel that they cannot wear tefillin. We'll talk more about it in a little bit. Again, maybe the leper also can't wear tefillin. The Gemara says no, maybe he can, meaning maybe this is not directly parallel. A mourner shouldn't greet people. Again, those of you who are familiar with the laws, when one goes to console a mourner, to be Menachem Avel, so there's actually a custom that when you go to console the person, you don't initiate the conversation. You don't say, how's it going, right? And also, interestingly, the mourner is not allowed to greet people, meaning they don't say, how are you? Right? They talk about their feelings, they talk about their emotions, but they don't greet people. Someone who is in excommunication also is either limited in his greetings or cannot at all. And again, the leper also shouldn't greet. So again, parallel. The mourner shouldn't learn Torah, right? He doesn't learn Torah. A minudeh, someone who is excommunicated, should learn. So that's a difference. That's going to be different than the things we've said previously. And interestingly, the person who is excommunicated can also teach. Again, the Gemara now on Daf 15 tells us that there are different levels of excommunication. One is called nidui, that is the lowest. The other, more stringent, is called cherem. Someone who's put in cherem, that's more stringent, he can learn by himself, but he cannot teach. Again, a leper can learn Torah. The Gemara says he should learn Torah, right? That gives him awe and teaches him the things that he should be doing. A mourner should not wash their clothing. Someone who's in excommunication and a leper also cannot launder their clothing. Again, a mourner tears his clothing, as you can see here in the picture. This is also learned from Aaron, who didn't, but the Gemara tells us that everyone else should. The leper also tears his clothing. The Gemara tells us that the mourner should turn over his bed. This we don't have nowadays. You can sleep on your regular bed, but there is this idea of turning over your bed, that it should be, uncomfortable when you sleep. They also can't work. Again, like we said, like on Chol HaMoed, the person who's excommunicated can work. The mourner cannot bathe or anoint oneself, also cannot wear shoes, also can't have relations. The leper also cannot have relations. Again, these things sound familiar to people, right? Those are the things that we don't do on Yom Kippur and on Tisha B'Av. Again, bathing, anointing, wearing shoes, all of these are a sign of mourning. So that's learned from here. These are the signs of mourning. Okay. The Daf 16 tells us that a court can send for someone via messengers and set a time that they must appear in the court. And if they miss it, they set up a second time. And if not, then they put them into cherem, right, into this excommunication, or shamta is another way to say it. Shamta is in Aramaic, this idea that they are excommunicated because they didn't listen to the court. You cannot, what does it mean that a person is excommunicated? It means you're not allowed to eat with that person or drink with that person. You need to publicize what they did. And the court can actually make the person's possessions ownerless, and you could argue with him. It says even that the court can beat him or whip him. Again, I think these are very stringent laws. I think the idea here is we want to make sure that people have a reverence for the Jewish court system. And this is a way of imposing that reverence, meaning people understand to take these courts seriously. Again, it's interesting to think about in a time where you can understand it, let's say, living outside of Israel, right? If you live in America, you can understand a regular civil court system. But if there's a Jewish court, you might say, what do I have to listen to the Jewish court for? It's not like they can arrest me. They can't do anything. So I think that, again, this is my opinion. I think maybe this idea is giving power to the Beit Din, to the Jewish court, that says that one needs to listen to the Jewish court. You're right that they can't put you in jail if you don't listen, but there will be other consequences. And interestingly enough, we have mentioned this before, right? The consequences seem to be communal consequences, right? We've discussed this previously, the importance of belonging to a community in Judaism. And interestingly, the punishment of not listening to the Jewish court would be being excommunicated from that community. And that would be a very severe punishment. So it's interesting to think about the ramifications. The Gemara tells us a little bit more about excommunication. You start with a minimum of 30 days, then you add 60 days, and then it becomes cherem, meaning much more severe. Or maybe you do cherem right away if this is a person who degrades a sage, right? If someone does not have proper respect for a teacher, for a sage, then they become they can be put into cherem, into excommunication. The Gemara tells us that 3 people can put someone into cherem, right? And then 3 other people can't take him out, meaning the person who puts you in is the person who takes you out, right? Again, if you offended my court, so I'm the one who's going to let you back in and not anybody else. But right, let's say that there is an idea of local excommunication as opposed to something that's more general, right, from one city to another, right? The Gemara tells us that if the Nasi, right, who is seen as the leader of the Jewish people at the time, almost like a king, right? So if the Nasi puts someone in cherem, that's cherem for everybody. It doesn't matter what city he lives in, that's for everybody. And then the Gemara says maybe 3 people can release that person from their excommunication. Okay, the Gemara talks about also someone taking it upon themselves to separate from the community, right? If you think you've done something wrong, you can take on this very low level of excommunication, and that has a minimum of 7 days. Rebbe said that you shouldn't teach Torah in the marketplace. This is a story, right? He says you shouldn't teach Torah in the marketplace. And then Rabbi Chia taught his 2 nephews in the marketplace, and Rebbe got very upset. So he took upon himself this, like, again, low level of nidui, of excommunication upon himself. And Rabbi Chia thought, right, that you can teach outside based on a certain verse. And he thought, right, again, there are other things that need to be done privately, but learning Torah would be okay. The Gemara tells us that in Bavel, this low level of excommunication is even 1 day. And the Gemara gives us stories of different sages who took it upon themselves for 1 day. So we see that it could even be for 1 day. Okay, the Gemara starts talking about David, right? Because he talks about that David shouldn't have sung a song when Shaul died. He praised, or he sang a song, and God basically told him that Shaul was better than him. So the Gemara tells us that David showed the benefit of tshuva, of repentance, right? David said, Hashem said that he rules over kings, but the righteous person rules over God. What does that mean? We don't really rule over God, but if God makes a certain decree and then we repent and we force God, in the sense, to change that decree, then it shows that the penitent person actually rules over God. So it's an interesting perspective on who has power over who. The Gemara now describes David as a student and then as a teacher, and talks about how he was so humble that he actually sat on the floor below his teacher. The Gemara says, right, he bent himself like a worm when he learned Torah, again, to show this humility. But when he went out to war, he was strong like a tree, right? And here we really see, first of all, the duality of David, the greatness of King David, where he was on one hand so humble, on the other hand very strong, a very mighty leader. And also this idea of someone who's so great and rules over the people can also be so humble, which is an important quality. The Gemara on Daf 17 tells us that if somebody puts someone in excommunication, then again, he's excommunicated for everybody. But if a student does it, so then the rabbi doesn't have to keep that excommunication. One second. Okay, sorry. So the Gemara really is talking about the dignity of the Torah, of a teacher, and of a student. And again, if somebody is disrespectful, then that teacher has the right to excommunicate that person. The Gemara tells us that a Torah scholar can execute judgment for himself, even right when he's sure of the law. Right, if you know the law, so then you can, impose whatever judgment you think that you need if you are knowledgeable and you don't have to go to the court. Interesting, and here the Gemara gets. Okay, the Gemara tells you says that if a person has a bad reputation, if a teacher does something that's inappropriate, then you shouldn't learn a Torah from that person. And I think that again, I think this is a very current idea. Unfortunately, in the past few years, unfortunately, a lot of media attention has come to people, rabbis, teachers who unfortunately have done terrible things. So number one, those people should be punished. But there's always this question of what do you do with that person's teachings, right? Do you take their books and burn them? Do you leave them on the shelf? So interesting here, the Gemara talks about not learning Torah from somebody who acts inappropriately. The Gemara talks about here if here the Gemara talks about the maidservant of Rebbe actually put someone in nidui for 3 years. And I think this is also a beautiful idea, right? We've been talking about rabbis or teachers putting people into excommunication. We've been talking about students, people who are learning Torah. Here we have the maidservant of Rebbe. She is mentioned often in the Gemara as being someone who is very righteous, and she actually excommunicates someone for being interesting. Why does she excommunicate the person? She saw a man hitting his adult son, and she said, the Torah tells us, do not put a stumbling block in front of a blind person. What does that mean? You, an adult, are hitting your adult child. That adult child is going to get so upset and hit you back. And we know that the punishment for hitting a parent is death. So she said, you are actually causing your child to be liable for death. And therefore, she excommunicated him. And that excommunication lasted 3 years. And the Gemara tells us that the Nasi actually is allowed, the Nasi being the leader of the Jewish community, he can release, a person from excommunication. The Gemara says that if you put, what if you put someone very influential into excommunication? So the Gemara has a machloket if you can put the Av Beit Din. So the Av Beit Din is the leader of the I would say the Jewish Supreme Court, right? So what if that person did something inappropriate? So the Gemara says that either you give him a warning first, or and then you excommunicate the person, or you never publicly put them into excommunication, because that is something that is disrespectful for God, that such an important person should be excommunicated. Again, I think that that's an interesting thing to think about. What is the liability of someone who is very influential in the Jewish community? The Gemara says, as we mentioned before, that a scholar can put themselves into excommunication and then release themselves as well. This word shamta, again, meaning to excommunicate, means either like death or desolation, right? Either it means that it has a lasting effect, right? This is something to be taken very seriously, or it means it has no lasting effect, meaning you pay the you pay the price, and then that's it. You move on. The Gemara says that you actually blow the shofar for this excommunication in shvarim, right? Broken. Do, right? And that sounds very broken, right? The Gemara says because this shamta, this excommunication, can break even the haughtiest of people, right? Again, this idea is who's being excommunicated? Someone who is haughty, someone who thinks so highly of themselves that they need to be broken, right? They need to learn humility. Okay, back to the leper and the Nazir, again, the Nazirite. They can get a haircut on Chol HaMoed, even if they had time beforehand, because we don't want to delay their purification process. Meaning part of the Nazir and the Mitzorah, the leper's process of purification, is to get a haircut or to shave their heads. Therefore, they must be able to do it, and we don't want the process of purification to be delayed. So the Gemara now tells us that you cannot get a haircut during Shiva or Shloshim, again, the mourning periods. Both, and as we said before, both are cut short by the festival. Therefore, right, if you were mourning before the festival, when you get to Chol HaMoed, you actually can get a haircut, right? If Friday is the 7th day of mourning, so then you can actually get a haircut on Friday. And now we're going to learn a concept in the Gemara, which in Hebrew is miktzat hayom kekulo. The words mean that a partial day or part of a day is like a whole day. What does that mean? And those of you who, unfortunately, who are familiar with the mourning ritual, the 7th day of mourning does not have to be a complete day. Rather, you sit in the morning for a few hours, and then you get up. Right, and here the Gemara tells us that that last day only needs to be partial, and then you can get up and you can bathe and you can get ready, especially if that day is going to be a festival or Shabbat. Again, as we said, if someone landed from a trip and then became a mourner and then became a mourner again, right, a week later, so now he can cut his hair. Or even if he didn't just land from a trip, he can cut his hair with a shinui, right? With some sort of change, right? Not do a regular haircut, but do it in a different way. The Gemara tells us that you should not cut your nails on Chol HaMoed, and a mourner also is not allowed to cut their nails, or maybe you are allowed to cut your nails, right? Again, as I mentioned before, the parallel between Chol HaMoed and mourning is going to, again, either it's directly parallel or there are things that are not parallel. Daf 18 gives us a story of a mourner who didn't cut his nails, and then they get into a fight and they throw it at each other. And basically, the Gemara tells us that you have to be very careful with what you say, because apparently one person kind of cursed the other, and that curse actually came true. So the Gemara tells us that Hashem is always listening. God is always listening to our words, and we should be careful with what we say because sometimes it can come true. There seems to be maybe a distinction between fingernails versus toenails. The Gemara tells us you can maybe bite your nails on Chol HaMoed and throw them on the floor. The Gemara says no, you can't throw them on the floor. This daf is the source for, if those of you have ever heard this, that you shouldn't cut your nails and throw them on the floor, lest a pregnant woman comes and walks over them or steps on them. The Gemara says that could cause a miscarriage, and therefore the nails should be thrown either into the garbage or into the toilet, and they should be disposed of in a proper way. The Gemara talks about trimming your mustache on Chol HaMoed, maybe only the hairs that are preventing you from eating. Also, let's go to laundry. The Gemara tells us that, as we mentioned before, if you only have one garment, you can wash it on Chol HaMoed. If you have two garments, you cannot. But you can launder linen garments and hand towels that get dirty, and the barber's smock, as we mentioned before. These are things that you can launder, again, if you need them. Nowadays, we say that, let's say if you have young children, they need underwear and socks, or they have limited clothing, you are allowed to do laundry on Chol HaMoed. But if you do not need to do laundry, it is better to not do laundry on Chol HaMoed. The next Mishnah on Daf 18 tells us that there are certain things that you're allowed to write on Chol HaMoed. It seems that in general you should not write on Chol HaMoed, but there are certain things you are allowed to. Kiddushin, right, to betroth a woman. This is not the same thing as engagement. This is a little bit more serious. So if you need to write a document to betroth a woman, you're allowed to do that. You can write a get, a divorce document, a receipt, a will, a gift, pruzbul, which is a loan. Right before Shemitah, the 7th year, you can write a document that says that we don't want this loan to be nullified or canceled, and therefore you're allowed to sign that document. Letters of evaluation you're allowed to write, letters of sustenance, chalitza, right, if you're going to do the chalitza ceremony, which is connected to Yibum, which is the Levirate marriage, right? We mentioned this last time, I think, that if a couple is married and they don't have children and the husband dies, the woman should marry his brother. Let's say the brother does not want to marry her or can't marry her. They do a ceremony called chalitza. So this document that they need for that ceremony can be written on Chol HaMoed. Also, if there's something called mi'un, which means if a brother gives his sister, right, basically the father died, if a brother gives his sister to be married to another person and she does not want to marry this person, she can sign this, what's called a document of mi'un, which means she does not want to be married, and that's enough, and she gets out of that marriage. Just parenthetically, if it was her father doing it, that wouldn't work, meaning, again, if she's a minor and if he has that control. Okay, the Gemara tells us that you can get, remember last time we talked about not getting married on Chol HaMoed, but the Gemara says you can get engaged, especially if you're concerned that maybe the girl is going to get engaged to somebody else, so you need to get engaged quickly, so you're allowed to do that. Maybe you can only write a document about how much each person will give, but not the actual engagement document, or maybe it is okay. Interesting, since we're talking about people getting married or engaged. So the Gemara talks about the bat kol, a divine voice came out of the heavens and says, who should marry who, right? Many people ask, right, is there only one person that I'm destined to marry? If you've heard people talk about beshert, right? Do I have a beshert? Is there somebody who's out there? There's only one person out there, and that's who I'm destined to marry. And then the Gemara says, look, if you're destined to marry that person, so no one else is going to come and marry them. And the Gemara says, no, maybe someone will pray to marry her, or it gets pretty complicated here. And the Gemara talks about the fact that you are destined to marry one person and bring sources from the Tanakh. Now the Gemara is going to talk about rumors. The Gemara tells us that if rumors are going around, so basically there must be some truth to it. Or right, either the person did what they're talking about, or maybe they thought about it, but there seems to be some validity to rumors, which is an interesting concept. But the Gemara says that no, what if there's someone who hates you, so then they'll start spreading rumors, and that doesn't have any validity. Or there's nothing to rumors. So then the Gemara says, wait a minute, you just gave me three different options. So the Gemara says that if there's a rumor and it stops, so that means there was no validity to it. If it continues at least a day and a half, so then there's some sort of truth to it. Okay, the next Mishnah on Daf 18 tells us that you cannot write a bill of debt, meaning if you borrow money, someone can't write that debt. But if he doesn't trust him, or if the scribe needs money, so then you can write it down. The Mishnah tells us that you cannot write a Sefer Torah or a mezuzah, write a Torah scroll or a mezuzah on Chol HaMoed, or maybe you can't even fix the Torah. Or maybe you can write it for yourself, like let's say you need a new mezuzah, so maybe you can write it for yourself, but you can't write it in order to sell it. The Gemara on Daf 19 talks about spinning thread of tchelet, the blue thread. Let's say you need it for your tzitzit. So the Gemara says you can spin it on your leg. You cannot do right with a shinui, right? Something different. You cannot do it with like a spindle. I'll show you a picture in a minute. The Gemara says maybe you can. We talked about writing a mezuzah or a Torah. The Gemara says maybe you can do this as a favor for somebody else, or maybe you can write it for yourself and then say, oh, really, I don't need it, and sell it, and then write it again for yourself. So that seems to be some sort of trick. Or no, if you need money, again, we spoke about this before, if you need money, and here the Gemara says not only money to eat, but let's say to buy fancy food, so then you are allowed to write these things and sell it. So now talking about spinning, so the Gemara says, I don't know why they made the string red, because really tchelet is blue, but I guess maybe they wanted you to be able to see it. But here they said, right, you can use a stone. So the sages say you can use a stone in order to, I guess, weigh down the thread in order to spin it, right? Or, right, here's that spindle, right? Maybe you can use a spindle, but you're not using it in the proper way. You're doing it in a different way. The next Mishnah, is now going to talk about the mourning ritual. So we said, so just to explain, so there's Shiva, meaning 7 days of mourning. That's the most stringent. Then there's what's called Shloshim, which is till 30 days from the burial. So we're going to see in a minute that the Shloshim starts at the end of the Shiva and lasts 30 days from the burial, and you also cannot get a haircut within those 30 days. So the Mishnah on Daf 19 tells us that if a person died 3 days before the festival, then the festival nullifies or cancels the Shiva. And the same thing, if a person died 8 days before the festival, so then the holiday, the festival, cancels out Shloshim, right, the 30. Shabbat does not nullify, right? Shabbat actually counts as part of Shiva, and it doesn't stop it, right? So if you have a week, Shabbat is counted as part of that week, even though we'll see you don't do certain things on Shabbat. Okay, then there's a difference of opinion whether Shavuot, right? Again, Pesach and Sukkot are 7 days. Shavuot, which is part of the three festivals, but Shavuot is only one day. So there's a machloket if Shavuot is like the other festivals and cancels out the mourning period or not. The same thing with Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Is it like a festival or is it like Shabbat? So we'll see that in the Gemara. So the Gemara says again, as we said before, burial. If the burial is 3 days before the festival, then the Shiva is canceled. The same with Shloshim. And you can get a haircut Erev Yom Tov, right? The day before the Yom Tov starts. And if you didn't, then you have to wait till after the Shloshim. Again, or as we said, maybe not, maybe the festival cancels Shloshim completely. If 7 days before the festival, then you count that last day of Shiva as the first day of Shloshim, and then it cancels Shloshim as well. I'm sorry if this is getting complicated, but again, it's I think very interesting. I'm trying to kind of summarize. So the Gemara tells us that. Again, as I mentioned before, that seventh day after the morning, after you daven in the morning, after you pray, so then you get up from Shiva, and then you can wash, and it also counts as part of the 30 days, and the same thing for the 30th day. The Gemara tells us, how do we know that there's this concept of shloshim, of 30 days? We actually learn it from the Nazir, right? The Nazir, the Nazarite, the minimum days is 30. Therefore, mourning, the minimum days are 30, not the minute, sorry. The mourning period is also 30 days. So we mentioned that there's this idea of partial days versus full days. The Gemara tells us that the first 3 days need to be full. They cannot be partial. Therefore, if the third day is Erev Yom Tov, meaning the day that the festival is going to start that night, then you can only wash after the festival, meaning you can't stop before the festival starts in order to wash. What happens if a person dies on Chol HaMoed? Then the Shiva is postponed till after the festival. So you only start Shiva and Shloshim after the festival itself. If the person died 2 days before the festival, remember we said you need 3. So what if the person died 2 days before the festival? You keep the last 5 days of Shiva after the Chag, and then after the festival, the top of Daf 20 tells us that other people do work for them, but people can come over on the festival to console that person. Again, we said if a person died on Chol HaMoed, Shiva is after the festival, but again, people can come over during the festival to console the person for the first 4 days. Again, because they came to him during the festival, so then that's okay. What if they were buried before the festival? Then the days of the festival count for shloshim, but not on the festival. So here the Gemara again talks about, we said 3 days before the festival will cancel the mourning period. The sages say even 1 day before the festival, even 1 hour. Unfortunately, I remember a case where someone died right like the morning of, I don't remember if it was Pesach or Sukkot, but the morning of, right, meaning Erev Chag, and unfortunately there was no Shiva, right? They couldn't sit Shiva because it was canceled by the festival. So that was very difficult for the mourners. Here the Gemara now discusses what's called old news, right? Again, in the time of no telephone, no internet, how do you when you find out that somebody died, do you sit Shiva or not? So the Gemara says that if it's old news, what's old news? 30 days, at least 30 days after the person passed away. If you find out after those 30 days, you only have 1 day of mourning. If it's within 30 days, then you have 7 days of mourning. The sages say no, even if it's after 30 days, whenever you find out, you still have 7 days of mourning. here, the Gemara tells us that when we're talking about the laws of mourning, and that's what we're going to talk about probably till the end of the Masechet, the laws of mourning, when there's a machloket, we always go according to the lenient opinion, even if that lenient opinion is in the minority. Again, in general, in the Gemara, if you have a majority opinion versus a minority opinion, we always follow the majority. The Gemara tells us that that is not the case when dealing with mourning. We're always going to go with the most lenient case, which is very interesting. From here on Daf 20, we have stories of sages who heard that their parents had died, and then they keep the mourning period, meaning 7 days and then 30 days. From here, we see that the mourners, right, from the stories that are on Daf 20, we see that mourners can't wear shoes. Here we have the concept of old news and only keeping 1 day of mourning. We have this idea of, again, hearing within 30 days on Chol HaMoed. So then after the festival, they kept 30 days. And then again, if they heard within 30 days and then they find out on Shabbat, then after Shabbat, you only keep 1 day. And here again, this idea of old news versus new. There's a machloket if you tear your clothing, if you hear this old news, meaning more than 30 days. The Gemara tells us that with parents, you always tear your clothing, even if it's after Shiva. The Gemara says maybe that's just out of respect. Again, this idea that tearing your clothing is a sign of respect for the parents. The Gemara tells us that the Torah tells us that a priest is not allowed to become impure for a dead body unless it's one of his 7 immediate relatives. That is, right, father, mother, son, daughter, brother, and unmarried sister. This is also who you mourn for, right? These are your 7 immediate relatives. The Gemara adds also maternal siblings, also a married sister, right? A sister is a sister, and one mourns those immediate relatives. Some say that you also add a generation above or below, meaning a grandfather or mother or a granddaughter or son, or maybe not, right? We don't necessarily keep these laws for the generation above. The Gemara talks about spouses, right? When the spouse is mourning, how does the other spouse behave? And the Gemara says that when you are with that spouse, you should act in the ways of a mourner, but when you're not with them, you do not have to have those rituals anymore. So with that, we concluded through Daf 20. So those of you who are doing Daf Yomi every day, we have gone through till Tuesday. And those of you who are with me in the beginning, we are going to meet next week, Be'ezrat Hashem, at our regular day and time on Tuesday. And Be'ezrat Hashem, we're going to finish the Masechet next week. Even though, again, according to Daf Yomi, we only finish on Thursday, I'm going to try and finish everything by next Tuesday, so that the following week we will just learn the new Masechet. So with that, I wish everybody a Shavua Tov. It should be a good week, and see you next week.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.